Hi, I'm Bucky, and about a year ago I started to build myself a new desk. First I wanted to buy one, but after a bunch of research I just realized it wasn't gonna happen. Because the desk I wanted was $5,000, so instead of buying one, I decided to build one myself. Oh and yeah, I built it with free wood, in my shed, with minimal tools. I'll tell you more about that later, but for now, let's start by doing a quick design. I didn't want to just copy that guy's design, so I ended up tweaking a bit of stuff just to make it my own. After I had a pretty good idea of the dimensions of the desk, I could just start organizing and sorting the wood I got for the legs and for the top. Then I cut a straight edge on every single piece of wood with the joining jig on the table saw. And once I had a straight edge on every single one of them, I could then just cut the other side. Finally, I cut the ends perfectly square to make a good quality glue up on the butt joints. I started by gluing all the pieces of the legs. In total, I had to glue 12 pieces of about 5 inches minimum, and then 12 pieces of around 4 inches. And then I did the same thing for the top pieces, which in the end, I ended up doing 8 total glue ups for the top. I won't be going into much details about how I glue up tabletops with scrap wood, because I plan on doing a video strictly on that a bit later, in which I'll be able to go in a lot more details, so stay tuned for that. After the glue was all dried up, I passed everything through the joiner to make one side flat. And now I could plane everything perfectly flat, while also making sure to keep as much material as possible. And then I re-glued everything once again. All the pieces of the legs are actually gonna be 3 thickness of wood glued together, but the top is only gonna be made of 2 thickness. While I'm gluing the top, I'll tell you guys how I got all this wood you see behind me for free. So a while back I saw a post on Facebook Marketplace from a guy who wanted to get rid of a bunch of wood that he wasn't using for a couple $100. So I ended up buying it from him, but when I went to pick it up, he asked me what I was doing with all this wood. I told him I like to build furniture with recycled wood or anything pretty much, and that's when he showed me 2 old pallets of wood that was in pretty bad shape, to be honest, like all crooked planks, cracked, and nuts, holes, and he ended up asking me if I could do anything with this wood, and I told him yes. Even though it requires a lot of work to be usable, I can build a lot of things with all that wood. So that's when he offered me to actually give it to me for free, because he was eventually gonna just turn this old pile into firewood, and I couldn't just imagine wasting all that wood, so I picked it up and it's been in the corner of my shed ever since. So I pretty much just got lucky, and for those who are wondering, it's actually all red oak. So yeah, not the best wood in the world, but I'm happy with anything that's free. I started by planing all 8 pieces of the legs to the same thickness, about 2.5 inches. After cutting a straight edge on all of the vertical pieces, I then proceeded to cut one end perfectly square, and I cut the other end of the vertical pieces 2 at a time to make sure they're exactly the same length. I used dowels and a cheap dowel jig, which worked pretty well, to be honest, for the assembly of both legs. As you can see, I left the horizontal pieces longer and came back once the glue was dry with the track saw and cut the legs to their final size. Because the track saw doesn't cut deep enough, I came back and finished cut with a flush trim bit on the router. To make the exterior rounded corners on the legs, I once again used the router with a flush trim bit using this radius jig that I made from 1/4 inch MDF and these jigs that I got on Amazon for very cheap. I cut as deep as I could gradually, and then I flip the piece over to finish the cut. I also did the same thing with the interior corners, only this time I use a different jig that I also made from scrap MDF, and the radius is smaller on the inside of the legs. And once all the corners were routed, I very carefully used the track saw to cut a straight line to exactly the end of both radiuses that I just cut with the router. Once that was done, I could just clean off everything once again with the router and a flush trim bit. Once again, I started by planing all 4 top pieces to the same thickness. I basically had 4 pieces that I needed to glue together for the top. I'll be gluing them 2 at a time because it's just the easiest way for me to have the best results. I start by cutting the 2 edges that will be glued up together with the track saw. I could just glue the 2 pieces together right now, but to make sure I get the best results as possible, I'm just gonna do a final cut. I put some double-sided tape under both slabs just to make sure they don't move while I cut. Just make sure that your saw blade is actually cutting both edges at the same time so you get that perfect results. I used some biscuits and then I glued everything together. I ended up doing pretty much 3 times the exact same glue up, only for the top. That part was getting pretty boring and repetitive, so I'm not gonna show you too much of what I did right there. But it's kind of what you gotta go through if you're using scrap wood, free wood, or if you have a small shop like I do. And it's also kind of my first YouTube video and I don't really know what I'm doing, to be honest. And I don't even know if more than 10 people are actually gonna watch the video, so if some of you guys are actually watching this, feel free to really tell me anything in the comments. I'm here to learn and I'm here to have fun, so that's it. Once the 3 glue ups were done for the top, I could then cut it to size with my track saw. I made sure the top was perfectly square by checking diagonals. Then I used pretty much the exact same method that I did on the legs to round over the corners. Only difference is, instead of doing a 40mm radius, I did a 25, which is 1 inch. First thing I did is I actually cut the notch for the piece that will actually be screwed to the legs. Again, I'm using a jig that I made from 1/4 inch strap MDF. And then I cut the actual strip that will be used as the fixation system. And again, I rounded the corners with the jig I talked about earlier. And as you can see, I cut the attachment piece a bit shorter than the notch I did, just to allow for wood movement because the grain are actually going in opposite directions. And after that, I drilled the holes for the screw heads. And I clean everything off with chisels. And then finally, I drilled the holes for the screws. And once again, I cleaned the hole with the chisels to end up with this result, which is a way to allow the top and the legs to move in their own way. And then I transfer the holes to the top. I remove the attachment strip and drill the holes deeper and a bit bigger to then screw in some threaded inserts. As you can see, only the 2 holes in the end of the attachment strips are actually allowing for wood movement, while the center hole is actually fixed. I simply did it that way so that the strips always stay centered on the top. After I made sure everything fits good, I drilled the screw holes for the legs, but this time I didn't need to make holes that allow for wood movement because the wood grain on the legs and on the attachment strips is actually going in the same direction, so there's no need to do so. Then I unscrewed the strip from the top to transfer the holes on the legs. And after drilling a bit more, I put the threaded inserts in place, and that was pretty much it for the legs. Cable support is not only going to be the part where all the ugly computer wires are going to be hidden, it's also going to be acting as the bracing of the whole desk. Right now I'm routing the hole that's going to be in the back part where you'll actually be able to pass the wires from the cable support to the top. I made sure to do the roundovers on all the pieces that won't be accessible after the glue up. Once again, I glued everything down with biscuits and glue. And And while I was clamping everything, I just made sure to put on these blocks that are actually the same size as the bottom to make sure everything stays perfectly square while the glue is drying. After the glue was dried, I completely forgot to film that part, but I cut the both ends of the cable support perfectly square to exactly the same length of the top with the miter saw. Then I routed and I put some blocks in the end of the support. These blocks will actually be used to bolt the cable support to the legs, and they're actually what will be bracing the desk. It's probably gonna make a bit more sense when I install it later. Because I'm working with free wood, there's a bunch of cracks and knots and small holes that I needed to fill with some epoxy. The desk is gonna be a very dark brown color, so that's why I chose to use some black epoxy so it all blends in nicely in the end. I started by sanding everything with 80 grit, and then once that was done, I came back with 150 and did the old desk once again. And then I came back with the router and did the roundover on pretty much every single edge on the desk. If I remember correctly, I think that was 1/8 of an inch radius. And once that was done, I came back with 150 grit and did a quick sand by hand. After assembling everything to make sure everything fits well, I put the cable support in place. Once it was perfectly square, I marked it and then I cut a groove with the router because the cable support is actually gonna be glued under the top. I drilled the holes for the bolts that are actually going to be bolted into the legs. And then I glued the cable support into the groove I just cut. I also made sure to fill the hole in the middle with a small strip of wood. I clamped everything in place, and I also made sure to wipe off the glue just to make sure I don't have to sand too much. I also clamped the strip of wood in the middle. Once the glue was dry, I came back with a pointy drill bit and marked the center hole of the bolts that are gonna be bolted into the legs. Then I deassembled the legs, I drilled the hole where my mark was, and I screwed in some threaded inserts. I came back with a sanding block just to make sure there wasn't any glue residue on the wood. And I also chiseled and sanded the small block I glued in earlier. I bolted the 4 bolts that are bolted into the legs. And here's the look of the desk before I put any finish on. I don't know what you guys think about that, but I was very happy with how it came out. And looking back at it now, I kinda almost regretted putting some stain on it because I think I prefer the natural look, but it is what it is, man. Before putting any finish on, I always like to raise the grain. I'm using a wet rag, but you can also just spray some water on it. And while I let the water dry, I'll be doing some color tests. The finish I'll be using is called Brou de Noix in French. It's also called like Castle Extract. I'm using some scrap wood to test the colors. Make sure to spill some everywhere and just wait for it to dry to see the final look. If it's not dark enough, you can just come back, add more to your mix and test again. Then, once the water is all dried off, you can do the final sand. Sometimes I just start with the sander, but I always end up doing the last sand with actual sandpaper by hand. That way I can really feel any imperfection that I could have missed during the first sanding. Once you're happy with your color, you can then just start applying with the grain of wood. Let it sit for a bit and then come back with a rag and wipe off the excess. I pretty much always like to use this finish if I want to give a dark brown color to my projects. The reason I'm doing so is because, well, first, it's a natural product with no chemicals. It also penetrates a lot deeper than, I would say, normal stain, but it also simply looks better in my opinion. It gives the wood a very natural, rich, dark color that's kind of add a matte finish to it. It's just very hard to have this result with any other finish. I simply did one coat on everything and I was happy with the results. But keep in mind that you can always put more than one coat. In fact, you can pretty much put as many coats as you want until you like the results. For protection, I used auto wax oil. The brand I use is called Natura One Coat. It's pretty much the same thing as Rubio Monocoat that you've probably heard of. I used a combination of scraper and a foam brush to apply a generous amount. And then you let it sit for about 5 or 10 minutes, I think, and you come back with a rag and wipe off the excess. And then I did exactly the same thing for the rest of the desk. In theory, you only need to put one coat, but in my opinion it's better to put 2 coats on the high traffic surfaces like the top, and I also put 2 coats on the legs. And then the last thing I did is I put some leveling feet under the legs because I know for sure that the floors in my house are not even and I don't want a wobbly desk. And after a full year of work, the desk was finally done. It actually took so long to finish the desk that in the end I didn't even need one anymore, because I actually moved in with my girlfriend and we don't have space for it. But I still ended up selling it for about $1,000 but I ended up completely forgetting to take any videos of the final product. So I'm really sorry guys, but the only thing I have to show you the final desk is actually this picture that I took when I sold the desk. So yeah, that's pretty much it for the video guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I actually got a lot of free wood left, so if you guys want to see more, just let me know. I'll for sure be building more stuff.